are presented by the National Wrestling Alliance,
National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Champion,
the NWA,
National Wrestling Alliance.
The National Wrestling Alliance was formed in 1948 in Waterloo, Iowa.
July 18, 1948, a group of Midwestern wrestling promoters met at a hotel in Waterloo and founded the National Wrestling Alliance. Little did they know at the time, these individuals were changing the future course of professional wrestling forever. At this meeting were Sam Muchnick of St. Louis, Orville Brown, an active wrestler from Kansas City, Max Clayton of Omaha, Wally Carbo representing Tony Stecker of Minneapolis, and the man who called them to this initial meeting, Paul L. Pinky George. Paul L. Pinky George represented Des Moines. By the 1940s, he had well established himself as one of the top promoters in the Midwest. By 1948, however, he was finding it hard to obtain wrestling talent from promoters in St. Louis and Chicago, and felt that by establishing a National Wrestling Alliance, he would better receive talent and trade talent with his neighboring states. He was the founder of the National Wrestling Alliance and called these individuals to this meeting, and was the initial president. Pinky George was a distinguished individual. He had a lot of credibility, but the NWA soon grew well out of his grasp and became an international conglomerate. The NWA initially was going to be just a small Midwestern union, but by 1952 it had grown to more than almost 40 members and had a worldwide presence.
Well, the National Wrestling Alliance was an alliance between promoters. It was pretty much big-time business. If you remember, if you were an promoter in the NWA, you had a choosing of all the top talent in the world. All you had to do was call around to want them on this date, you could book them, you know. And if people went against you, or people did whatever, or ran a town that you didn't want them running, all you had to do was pick up the phone, call all the other NWA promoters, and they were blackballed. It was control. NWA controlled the wrestling profession for decades.
It was the hotbed of professional wrestling.
Whatever organization you want to talk about in professional wrestling today, trace it back, it came from the National Wrestling Alliance. The National Wrestling Alliance is the wellspring for professional wrestling, whether it be the WWE, whether it be TNA, whoever, even foreign promotions. NWA's wrestling is professional wrestling.
There were many reasons for these individuals to meet at this hotel on this particular evening. Among them were to better trade talent, to recognize a single champion, and to acknowledge their specific outlined territories.
It was important to have one world champion. In the late 30s, early 40s, I know there was one particular night in the United States that there was 12 matches for the heavyweight championship of the world in one night.
It's like it is now. Anybody can buy a belt and become a world champion. They say, I'm a world champion. They advertise themselves, I'm a world champion. Well, who is disputed? But now if you've got 30 to 40 promoters in big cities across the world saying this is the world champion, then that just kind of outweighs everybody else that claimed to be the world champion.
The National Wrestling Alliance felt that it was important to have a single world heavyweight champion because for far too long the business had been plagued by innumerable world champions in almost every major territory. This had contributed to a major downside in attendance.
So with every promoter promoting pretty much their own world champion, they thought it certainly diminished the title.
The NWA wanted to bring credibility to the business by having an undisputed world champion.
It was the most prestigious belt. You take a look at just across the country: Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, Dallas, Texas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, Amarillo, Birmingham, Knoxville, Memphis, Louisville, Nashville, Charleston, Charlotte, Greensboro. Other than in Atlanta, Georgia, other than a few of those were major cities that did not have NBA, NFL, or Major League Baseball. So the biggest sports stars they saw was the NWA wrestling on TV every week, and the grand prize was the NWA World Champion.
The world title belt meant many different things to many different people. To promoters, it meant money at the box office, because when the wrestling champion was coming to their territory, it meant a spike in attendance from their usual attendance figures. To the wrestlers, it meant an issue of pride.
And so they got together, they agreed, that they would indeed get together. and have one world champion, and they picked Orville Brown to be the first world champion. He was very popular in the Midwest, in that area, certainly, and at that time.
Orville Brown was a Kansas City blacksmith turned professional wrestler in the 1930s. He toured extensively throughout his early part of his career, but by 1940 he had settled into his home territory of the Central States. And by 1948, he was the most logical choice to be the National Wrestling Alliance World Heavyweight Champion. Orville Brown toured many places, many new locations for the NWA that first year. He was scheduled to wrestle Lou Thesz in a unification match in November 1949.
Before all that could happen, he was in an automobile accident which ended his career.
And the NWA had no other choice but to award the NWA World title to Lou Thesz. And
so Lou Thesz was probably the greatest champion of all time, got the title, and not only became champion, but I think defined what the National Wrestling Alliance and what the World Championship should be, and was from then on. Lou took the title and became really the first undisputed heavyweight champion since the early 1900s, with Hackenschmidt and Gotch and Stecker, and so that was a great milestone for the sport.
Lou Thesz was able to achieve recognition in many places that the NWA had previously not been recognized, and strengthened the world champion to immense proportions, where it was recognized as the sole undisputed world heavyweight title.
He went around the world and really established the NWA as a world championship. But Lou was the one who established this not only as a regional world title, but actually the World Heavyweight Championship.
Back in those days, they wanted a guy who could really handle himself in the ring, who was a shooter, hooker kind of guy. So, the champion traveled from territory to territory defending the title, and they didn't want, some promoter pulling a fast one on them and putting their local champion over whoever the NWA champ was. So they wanted to make sure they always had a guy who could beat everybody. And, Lou Thesz fit that category perfectly.
Lou Thesz was tried and true. That's why he was the world champion, because he could beat anybody they wanted to at any given time, and there was nothing they could do about it. And you had to have a champion like that in case you went into your local area and you had some local yahoo who's going to try the guy, maybe try to knock him out or take him down, hold him or whatever. They couldn't do it to Thesz.
Lou Thesz was the epitome of what they wanted a world champion to look like. He dressed the part, he wrestled the part in the ring, he could speak the part, and he had a credibility with sports writers and newspapers that no other wrestler had.
Slacks, sport coat, suit, tie, always looked like a champion in and out of the ring, and always acted like a champion. I think a big part of that is because, one, that's who he was. I mean, it wasn't a gimmick, it wasn't an act with him, it's who he was. But he brought that to the championship early on.
Wrestling and TV have always went together.
The dawn of TV was great.
They're cheap to produce, they draw ratings, people watch them, people like it.
Desperate for programming, desperate for cheap programming, and wrestling was tailor-made because, you had those huge cameras, they were pretty much stationary. You had a ring, you had 2 contestants and a referee. It didn't cost much to produce, it was action, and that's what I think made wrestling grow so much too, is because, again, people are watching, especially in the early days of wrestling and early days of television. You'd be seeing stars from all over the country. You'd see Lou Thesz, and at one time he was the most watched man on television, even more than Milton Berle back in the 50s.
Advent of TV, they could really promote there was a world champion traveling around, and that helped.
When TV first hit and there's Lou Thesz with that belt and they're saying this is the man, this is the best in the world, well, the whole world had the right to believe that. The president hadn't went on TV and lied to us yet. They hadn't exposed the game shows yet and everything else. So when they said something, you believed it. And in this case, they couldn't expose it because Lou Thesz was the world champion and he was as true as anything on television.
One year, 7 years, I think a little bit more, just at one stretch, which was pretty much unheard of. But again,
he was what everybody saw as the champion, and he defended the title. He drew a great crowd, and NWA couldn't have found anybody better.
He made a very good touring world champion, made a lot of money for the promotion and for the NWA.
He brought a lot of prestige and honor, to the World Championship, and which still is today. You can't hardly talk to anyone, I think, or you'd be hard pressed to find someone that actually knew Lou, worked with him, that didn't really appreciate now, looking back and just saying, thank you to him. Probably not only probably the greatest NWA champion of all time, or the greatest wrestling champion of all time, but he set the standard. He not only I think he helped set the standard for the business in a lot of ways, but certainly brought wrestling, in the 30s and the 40s, into a real mainstream. Lou also had a great respect for the business, and if it was good for the business for him not to be champion for a while, then he was more than happy with that. There's always this question about what happened in Chicago, with Edward Carpentier, because Carpentier had beaten Lou and they were claiming him as world champion. So Carpentier then, didn't want to face Lou again. And Carpentier was a good draw. He was more of a acrobat. Actually from Poland, but I think a great athlete and a good draw. But so there was a little controversy there, but Lou did still have the title. Was ready to retire. He'd been in a long time, had a lot of business interests and all. So when he was ready to drop the belt, he wanted to drop it to Dick Hutton. Dick out of Oklahoma, 3-time NCAA champ. So Dick becomes the world champion. And didn't draw real well. It was a great athlete. In '59, before the match with Pat O'Connor, Muchnick and a couple guys came in. Pat came in and says, Dick, we want you to drop the belt tonight, or the title tonight. And he said, no. I didn't want to, no. And so they explained to him, it's time for a change, and Pat will be champion. And also he just looked over at Pat, and this was all according to Dick, and he says, Pat, if you want it, come and get it. And Pat said no. So he agreed to drop the title, and kind of like Lou, I think he was counted out in one fall, and maybe in both falls, I can't remember, but he said, I lost the title without losing a fall.
The NWA heavyweight champion of the world, Pat O'Connor.
Pat was a great champion. Again, a great amateur champion from New Zealand, British Empire champion, New Zealand national champion. I mean, a great resume and a great wrestler, not just a worker, but just like Dick, a great wrestler. He had it for almost 4 years, and drew well.
From Camden, New Jersey, the NWA United States title holder, Buddy Rogers.
Buddy Rogers was coming on strong, and he just drew so well across the board that he took the title at that time, the largest wrestling crowd ever in Comiskey Park, winning 2 out of 3 falls from Pat, and did a great job as a traveling champion.
Nature Boy Buddy Rogers was a premier box office attraction. He meant big money at any wrestling arena across North America and across the world.
They never really had a heel champion.
But there's one thing I want everybody to know, and that is, to a nicer guy, it couldn't happen.
Buddy was certainly kind of the first heel champion.
Buddy Rogers was a performer, and he knew how to perform. He knew enough wrestling to make you believe that he was as good as he said he was.
And was more of a showman than in the vein of Lou Thez. He was a top champion and brought a lot of attention to the NWA.
He said, Buddy wasn't a great wrestler, on the level of like Dick Hutton and all of that, because he didn't have an amateur background. But he was a great worker. He was a good wrestler. He was a great worker. But he said, as far as showmanship, he said there was nobody that could beat Buddy Rogers.
He also had that gift of gab, because when television came along, they realized people were watching wrestling, but also they realized something was missing.
Buddy Rogers is much better TV.
TV was big. Buddy was flamboyant, a lot like Gorgeous George, blonde hair, would say, stuff like, when the going gets too tough for everyone else, it's just right for the Nature Boy. Or if you want a champion on your card, you need Rogers to fill the bill.
And Buddy Rogers and guys like him and Gorgeous George, those was what was missing. The bleach blonde, the tan, the bodies, and guys that could get on TV and talk. And not just, they didn't have to wrestle to make you want to buy a ticket. Buddy Rogers could just start talking and you wanted to buy a ticket to see him get his tail beat that week somewhere.
There were some questions about his dedication to the Alliance. However, these were vetoed in 1961 when he beat Pat O'Connor and won the championship in Chicago. However, it wasn't too long after that that a lot of fears about Rogers being the champion came true.
But he kept the title, got promoted mostly by Vince's dad, Toots Mondt, and kind of the group in New York. And they wanted to pretty much control the championship, and they did for quite a while.
He started to spend more time in the Northeastern Territory, wrestling in bigger cities like Chicago, and would go to some of the NWA member territories, but did not spend a lot of time like his predecessors had. This angered a lot of NWA members.
He didn't venture out of New York very much, or Ohio, or Washington, D.C., Baltimore, where they were stronger. They were members of the NWA, but they were pretty much controlling the belt. And Muchnick and the rest of the country, wanted the world champion too. They paid their dues to get the world champion to come. And of course, Buddy had to go where he was booked. So the NWA decided it was going to be time to go shopping for a new champion, and when they did, they knocked on the door of Lou.
In 1963, Sam Muchnick convinced Lou Thez to return to the helm of the National Wrestling Alliance.
Who was retired, and you might even say semi-retired, but they wanted Lou to take the belt, and I don't think Lou was really even convinced, because Lou was almost 50, and was very comfortable with his other business ventures, but he said he would, and so they met with Buddy. Buddy, I know, didn't want to drop the title, but I think they held the money in escrow. When a champion, back in those days, when he became world champion, you had to put up a $10,000 cash bond for the belt, so you wouldn't drop the title to somebody you weren't supposed to. And they said, Buddy, we're going to take the title, and we got your $10,000, we're going to give it to charity. And if you want your money back, it's time to change. And so he met Lou in Ontario, Montreal, one fall match, and Lou took the title.
Buddy Rogers continued to be recognized as the world title holder by the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and this was actually the precursor to today's WWE.
So we had another 3-year run, and again established really that traveling champion. Lou is everywhere. Lou was still the champ and been very tough to beat. Really decided that, okay, now, I've been in it for 30 years. It's time for me to get out, at least from the competition part. So he picked Gene Kiniski. He liked Gene, had some great matches, respected Gene.
Gene Kiniski was, again, fit that bill. He was one badass. He could go an hour with anybody.
So Lou dropped the title to Gene, and I think he was very happy to do it. Gene was really set himself as, where Buddy was a heel champion, Gene was really the heel champion.
Unlike, Thez, he was a little more colorful, he was big and mean, and he was a heel, more or less, He didn't follow the rules. He could brawl and punch and kick with the best of them, but he could also handle himself in the ring. Great world champ.
Gene Kiniski, just loudmouth, braggadocious, brought size to the World Heavyweight Champion in a slam-bam, always moving style. A lot of the wrestlers of that era, guys that saw him and worked with him, really praised his style. You got an exciting match every time with him, and a guy that people want to see get his block knocked off.
Kiniski was a different kind of worker, but he was a machine.
He was a wrestler's wrestler. He wasn't flashy. He was like Dory Jr. But to me, he didn't have that gift of gab either. But, he held up. All of these matches held true. There was 40-some wrestling promoters that voted to make him the world champion, so he had to have something.
He was a very versatile performer and was good behind the microphone, good in the ring, and had a reign lasting from 1966 to 1969.
One thing about the title, especially back then, you know, it's just the rigors of having the belt and traveling that 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you know, into it, like Dory had it 4.5 years. It's just that mental and physical exhaustion of wrestling night after night after night. Gene was great, and again, just when I talked to him about when he dropped the title, which is unusual with Dory because it surprised everybody. I mean, it came out of nowhere. You know, on a Tuesday night in Fort Hester Armory in Tampa, Florida in February. You know, as I talked to Jack, he said, you know, we all thought Dory was going to get the title sooner or later, but we thought it'd be St. Louis. We thought it would be a big venue, but it ended up being on a Tuesday night, and Gene said, you know, I was just so tired. You know, I was ready to drop the title. And
it can always happen, and it was a great match. From what I can say from my position, it was a great match with Gene Kiniski. And I feel very close to Gene Kiniski. He was responsible for me being able to continue in the wrestling business. He helped me through a knee injury. And the match was great, and I did walk out of the ring on that day, NWA World Heavyweight Champion. And I won the NWA World Heavyweight Championship against Gene Kiniski. It's a night that will never leave me. And even though it took place, 35 years ago. And the match was about 15 minutes. My father was in my corner.
He needed a change. You know, it was 1969. You know, the old champion look and all that, the kind of the flat top burr haircut kind of thing had gone out of the way. It was a new generation coming up, and they picked Dory. You know, they picked Junior to take the belt and to bring it to another level, a new generation.
Dory Funk Jr., you look at him, you didn't think he was all that, but I want to tell you something. In the ring, the guy knew how to move. He knew the moves. He knew how to use the moves.
I found Dory boring as hell. Again, a great wrestler. He could handle himself in the ring, tie anyone in knots.
People say he's bland and he's this and that. He did his talking in the ring. His brother could talk and yell and scream and make you buy tickets that way. Dory made you buy a ticket because he knew how to take his time and make every movement mean something. And he could take anybody and get in the ring now and make them look like $1 million.
My brother had more ability than what I ever had. He was wonderful in the ring.
Reporters get together, and they always did in Las Vegas every year, and they would vote, you know, who's going to be champion. And so, I mean, it's a great honor. You know, I mean, you got to be able to wrestle. You got to be able to hold the title and be able to draw money and just have all these pieces together. You know, and there's very few folks who actually, you know, could put those pieces together. But Dory, again, a new look, young man, you know, very well spoken. Again, the same as Lou. You know, sport coat, tie. You know, he'd have his cowboy hat. He'd carry the belt high.
It meant credibility. It meant that when people went to the arena to see a World Heavyweight Championship match, they thought this time it's going to be for real. They really thought they were seeing real wrestling. And I could give that credibility to the NWA World Heavyweight Championship.
You can't not talk about Dory Funk Jr. without talking about his #1 opponent, his #1 partner in the ring, and that would be Jack Briscoe.
Him and Jack Briscoe had great matches.
We had great matches.
この2人なら2時間戦って平気でしょう。はい。両者はもうスタミナ十分であります。腰投げ。もう一回。
I think having a good guy challenger, having a babyface challenger, a hero challenger, going after a hero champion was great because, you know, Dory would always be wrestling. You know, a lot of times it would be, you know, baby faces, sometimes it would be heels, but to have two great competitors.
They had some of the best wrestling matches anybody ever saw.
You put him against Jack Briscoe or somebody like that who was one of the greatest in the world. You got two guys that know how to wrestle, how to tell that story, and there's nothing bland or boring about it. It's as exciting now as it was 40 years ago.
ドリー・ファンク・ジュニアでございます。ドリー・ファンク・ジュニアの強豪中の強豪。はい。もちろんストロークのタイムアップ レースは水利教育大学の一緒にが挑戦をしております。さあ両者の動きが速くなりました。腰を取りました。さあどうだ、回転エビ型にいった。あった、カウント2です。ドリーファンクジュニア
初めて効果を上げるものですから。
ショルダーアタックです。ジャンプをしたドリーファンク、そして首投げにいったドリーファンク。おっと逆さを抑え込みにいった。カウント2。
防御してるというような感じですね。
はい、おっと行きました。テキサスビルでしょうね。はい、
しかもジュニアが全く退きを見せてませんね。
今35分を経過したというアナウンスがありました。さあ両者の動きが速くなっております。ジャンピングジャッククリスト、フランクドロップキック、両肩を捉えました。そして巻き投げ、今日の独断場、今度は反対だ。うまく逆を取りました。カンのエルボースマッシュ、ドリーファンクに勝った。エキサイトしたドリーファンク、強烈です。体全体を相手の体重に乗せました。そしてスープレックスに行く。どうだ、決まるか。どうだ。
I think it's like Frazier and Ali, but I think Funk and Briscoe matches were like the gold, platinum standard. You know, you hear guys for years saying, well, that was a good match, but it was no Briscoe Funk, or it was no Funk Briscoe match.
Jack had everything that I needed as his opponent to give those people a very credible wrestling match every time out.
They were one of the first acts that could really take their feud because of the way television evolved, and the Florida Championship Wrestling show began to get shown in different markets, and just reputations began to come around too. They were able to take that feud and headline shows all over the country with not even being in the promotion. It was one of the first national feuds.
So they pick Jack, and before he gets to be champion, you know, again, now you got to put up the bond, and now it's up to $25,000. So Jack had to put up $25,000 in cash to the NWA to secure the title. And another thing he had to do was, he, just like any other champion, but I think more so now with Jack, he had to travel around the country and lose to every major star in every territory. But he said back then, you know, losing really meant something, and now there's films of me all over the country losing to everybody. So my credibility is getting kind of bashed around the country.
I was on my father's ranch. He said, let's move some cattle. Called Terry out, got him on the phone. And you have to understand what my father's ranch was like. He had an upper plateau, and also there was a lower part where a creek ran through the bottom country. And we were going to bring the cattle up from the bottom to the top. And we had a pickup truck, and I was driving the pickup truck. My father and my brother were on foot, and we were chasing cattle. And we took off after a calf. And watching a calf, our pickup truck ran over a six-foot embankment. That's not far, but when you run a pickup truck off an embankment like that, and you hit the water and the ice, it messed me up pretty good. And I really know it was the winter time for sure. I don't know what the day was. Maybe you guys will know, because you know when the match was scheduled for Jack in Houston. But there was about an inch of ice on top of the water, and it all came in front of the car. In that pickup truck accident, I received a separated shoulder, among other things, including facial and head lacerations.
So he was scheduled in May to take the title from Dory. Depends on who you believe about the truck accident. Now Jack was of the opinion, a lot of folks are too, as they call it, kind of a phantom truck accident. You know, Dory did say it happened, and again, I'm not the one to say what did and what didn't happen.
We were supposed to have a match on a Friday night in Houston. I was in Miami Beach on a Wednesday night. Eddie Graham called me and he said that we went back in the shower. He says, I just got a phone call from Dory Funk Sr. He said, Junior supposedly has rolled his pickup on the ranch and has separated his shoulder and won't be able to make Houston on a Friday night. I knew right then, anytime the old man Funk was behind something was wrong. He was playing games with somebody. So Junior didn't show up.
That's the only match I missed in my career, and I could not make it to Houston before the match with Jack Briscoe.
I think he didn't want to lose the belt to Briscoe.
I've heard Harley Race's take on it. I've heard an interview with Briscoe where he talked about it, and I've heard Dory's take on it, and it's business. Business is business, and that's that, and it don't matter. It's all dollars and cents at the end of the day.
They called and they begged my father and said, "Can't you just get him to come down to Houston and walk in the ring?" And I had one shoulder that would that I couldn't raise, and there was no way. I was in a hospital for 3 days, so they were very, very upset that I didn't make the match, that I didn't make Houston. And I had never missed a match in my life and haven't missed a match since.
Dory comes back. The Funks had a great relationship with Harley. They looked at Harley initially kind of as a transitional champion, but he certainly proved that to be wrong.
I did come back, and I came back wrestling maybe a little bit soon at the request and the pressure of Fritz von Erich, Sam Muchnick, Eddie Graham for that matter, wanted me back in the ring wrestling for the world title, and I did, and I came out, probably came back too early, and went in the ring against Harley Race in Kansas City. And in a disputed decision, Race walked away with the World Heavyweight Championship.
The match itself probably wasn't one of our better ones in the overall scheme of things.
I think he personifies the traveling champion. He just did, just an outstanding 4.5 years, as world champion.
I don't know, say underrated because he held it for 4.5 years. So I don't think they, if they would have thought he was that underrated, they would have let him hold the belt that long.
My brother, I think, was probably, and I'm not just saying this because he's my brother, but I've analyzed it through the years. I think he is probably the greatest NWA champion ever.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Because he would go into these different areas and wrestle guys in Tennessee and wrestle them for an hour, and everywhere that he went, as the guy that he got into the ring with was much better than whenever he stepped into the ring at the first time, his opponent.
Yeah.
He always did wonderful things for his opponents.
Dory Funk Jr. for 4 years probably was the most successful world heavyweight champion of his era.
I do want to say that at the time that I was predominant in the wrestling business, the biggest thrill was winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, and just have to say that all the other titles kind of pale in comparison to having the honor of being the NWA World Heavyweight Champion for 4.5 years. But the NWA World Heavyweight Championship held so much prestige and was so big and was so important in those days that that is the one that really sticks with me.
July 20th, 1973. They were going to retire the belt, and that was one thing they were really promoting. Bosch was promoting there, and was that there's going to be a new title belt. There was a new $10,000 belt made in Mexico. They retired the old belt, the one that Dory had, the one that Pat, Buddy, and Lou, and Gene all had.
Sam Muchnick came into the old Sam Houston Arena that night with the brand new belt, and I was the last champion to hold belt that had been around since early 30s, and handing him that belt and taking that Mickey Mouse thing that they'd come up with, and especially then it had a velvet backing.
Jack wrestles 2 out of 3 falls. Jack loses the first fall. Harley had that suplex. Jack took the second fall with the figure 4, and then the third fall he did with the Luthez press, and he said he had that plan because he wanted to do it, in tribute to Lou. So he won the world championship with the Luthez press, was awarded the new belt, and became champion.
Well, it was after all that had happened and the games being played by everybody, it was, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. If it had come off as what it was supposed to be, and I would have been sure. I've been a very proud moment for me, and something I'd worked for years. something I had counted on doing all my life. But when the way it happened, it took a lot of thrill away from me.
Now Briscoe was champion, had never beat me for the World Heavyweight Championship, and made an ideal rematch, at least for Florida and for Texas, and any other place. So it worked out much better for Jack anyhow. So I really don't understand why he would complain.
Jack was a tremendous champion. Again, along the lines, certainly along the lines of Lou and Dory. Traveled worldwide with the belt.
Jack Briscoe, smooth, good-looking babyface, world heavyweight champion that people respect, and of course he had the amateur credential.
He was technically a phenomenal wrestler. He had the credibility that it takes to draw money. Being the great amateur champion he was.
He had the credentials, NCAA champion. But Jack also was a good-looking guy, good body, Indian blood. He was part Indian. He had, that dark skin, dark hair, and girls liked him. So he was not only, before most of the time, the world champion, when he went into a town, had to be the villain because people wanted to see the local hero beat him. Briscoe was kind of different. He could go into the local area and be the hero. They could put some steam on a villain, and here comes Jack Briscoe, and this good-looking Indian from Oklahoma, the world champion that we're all behind, he's going to take care of this guy. So he was kind of a little bit different from the rest of the world champions in that mold. But his wrestling ability was second to none. Nobody could touch him.
But then Jack, you got a popular champion, you got a guy, a former collegiate champion, now is the world heavyweight champion, good-looking guy, early 70s, had long hair. And again, just where Dory took it into a new generation, Jack was kind of continuing that. Jack had 2 runs as champion. He had the first run, and then in, was it 74, Baba wanted the title. And the story that Jack told me was Terry Funk was the one who kind of helped coordinate that because the Funks were doing a lot of work with Baba in Japan.
At the time, Funks, they were booking Japan, said that. So, of course, the NWA was Sam Mushnick booked the world's champion, so Japan always brought the world's champion over there. But this time they wanted to do a belt switch, and able to do a belt switch, you had to get all the NWA members to agree to it. And so Junior and Terry was booking the other American boys over there, but like I said, Sam booked the champion over there. So they wanted to switch the belt to Baba. Baba wanted this, and the Funks wanted it. So Terry approached me that when you go over there, why don't he says, we can work out a deal. He said, Baba said he'd pay you $10,000 if you dropped the belt to him.
I think he said he'd offer him, it was $5,000, maybe $10,000, and maybe it was 10. And he says, I had to put up $25,000 for the belt just like Dory did. I'm not going to lose 25 to gain 10.
Like I said, Terry had offered me 10 grand. I told Terry, tell Bob if he wants the belt bad enough, I said, I'll have to have at least 25 grand for it. No, you don't want to do that. No. I said, well, let me talk to Baba. So Terry called back and said, well, Baba agreed to your figure.
Giant Baba, was a promoter, and that's part of being, having the pull of running, All Japan like he did. He could buy the belt. He was more over in Japan than anyone like Dory Funk or Jack Briscoe ever could imagine be here in the United States. I'm probably like on the level of like Ric Flair was at his heyday, or Hulk Hogan. It was Baba in Japan.
Baba wanted to build up his territory. He and Inoki had split. There were 2 wrestling territories there, and All Japan and Pro Japan, and Baba needed the title. It was instant credibility. If you're the world champion, that's instant credibility.
Giant Baba stood 6'9". He was a real giant. In the ring, he was a legend in Japan. He won the NWA World Title on 3 occasions, and his winning the title brought a lot of repute to professional wrestling in Japan and to himself.
That put him above Inoki and the other promotions is, you know, not only do they have their champion, but this is the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. This is the title Lou Thesz held. This is the title Dory Funk Jr. held. How Baba has it.
Baba was probably the nicest of all the big guys.
Right.
He had a heart every bit as wide and as big as him. And for some reason or other, Bubba and I clicked. I could do a lot of things with him that other people couldn't do with him, and he really liked that.
3 times. 3 times he beat Jack. He beat Harley twice. Again, for only a week at a time.
I made him world champion 2 different times around. Bubba was just a great, great human being.
There were short runs. He bought it. A lot of people in the United States didn't even acknowledge it ever happened.
Jack did make a deal with Baba. Dropped the title there, won it back a couple nights later, you know, before he came back, you know, to take the title the second time.
First couple of years was great. I loved it. Just going around traveling. I lived on the airplane and in the airports. And, for 3 years, that's my whole life was either in an airplane or a hotel or in a Coliseum somewhere. It was tremendous. I loved it. It was a great life, a great way to make a living. It didn't take about 2.5 years, and I was just very tired, very worn out. The deal with the NWA and the champion was supposedly 3 weeks on, a week off, 3 weeks on, a week off. Well, that's the way it started out, and then pretty soon everybody said, "I want the champion, I want the champion." So that week off that I was supposed to get every 3 weeks just evaporated, and I was just working all the time and just like doing hour Broadways almost every night, and it would just get to the point where I was just exhausted. I'd have to wake up in the mornings and get my airplane ticket to look to see where I was and where I was supposed to go. It just everything just started running together and confusing, and stayed in Holiday Inns, and I didn't. They all in one room, looked all like the rest of them. I didn't know where I was at half the time, where I was supposed to go. So I checked an airplane ticket, and I was very mentally exhausted and physically exhausted, and I needed a rest.
He talked to the NWA. He said, I want to drop the title by the end of the year. And they didn't want Jack to lose the belt. You know, just because he was drawing well, he was very popular. And he said, no, you know, it's time. Of course, Terry was picked. You know, in 75, Jack dropped the title. He was supposed to wrestle Dory, as the story goes.
Gosh, I remember one of the not so fond memories of it. Really, I went down to Miami as a substitution for my brother that night, which worked out wonderfully.
You know, you have kind of a substitution, which gets everybody kind of, oh, you know, maybe he's not ready for this guy. So Jack, as he said, you know, when I went for the figure 4, and you know, Terry cradled me and counted 3 and said, you know, Terry had the title, and I got my life back.
Terry was a great worker. I had great success with Terry.
And I went against Briscoe that night and defeated Briscoe. And it was, you know, I was very, very, you know, elated at that time. I really was, because it means that I was on the top of my business at that particular time.
Yeah.
The only bad part about it is, if you'll see the 3 count in there, you know, whenever Briscoe went for the cradle, you know, he went for the figure 4 and I cradled him. As you see me go to get up, you'll see my hand come back like this. Sonny Myers was the referee, and I just came right across his nose like that. Broke it like in 4 or 5 places, you know, and he just, you don't see the referee after that point, you know, I mean, his nose was like this, you know. But it was really something to be, you know, to follow in my brother's footsteps.
First 2 brothers to have the NWA championship. two brothers never to hold the championship was great, because when Dory was champion, they always would say, you know, Terry will never have a chance, because as long as Dory has the title.
For my money, one of the best performers I've ever seen in wrestling.
Terry thought he was going to be the first buffoon champion. He did a lot of goofy crap.
Sometimes Terry Funk could be over the top and act like a clown, and they were very serious. You know, it was beginning to degenerate a little bit after Sam Mustick lost some control over the world title, of the credibility of the of the NWA World Champion. But they wanted the NWA World Champion to be somebody who was, you know, who was credible. And Terry Funk sometimes didn't do that, but I mean, he was an exciting performer that could go in and do the job of bumping us, you know, just bumping around the ring and making that local hero look great.
Terry Funk is known as a hardcore icon today, but back when he was the NWA World Champion between 1975 and 1977, he was known as a very versatile performer. He could brawl, he could wrestle technically.
A lot of people don't know this about Terry Funk because he's got such a hardcore reputation right now. But in his early career, he was a very good mat wrestling style professional wrestler.
Terry Funk reinvented himself, you know, in the middle age and crazy after he'd had to run as the world champion and he had to run the WWF. But if you go back and watch Funk, they're a wrestling family. The dad, both brothers, everybody come out of Amarillo could wrestle. They were wrestlers. That was a wrestling area. And Terry got that belt because he was a wrestler. He got that belt because people had enough confidence to know that he could go out there and have legitimate wrestling in the ring, but he could still wild and crazy and brawl. And he was the perfect mixture. He could fight, he could wrestle, and he could talk. He could make people love him or make people hate him.
Terry had a good run as champion, you know, for a year. I thought he was a good champion. I would like to have seen him hold the title, you know, longer. I think fans today, if they don't know that, at least that part of Terry's career, they really missed a lot.
I think, you know, Terry Funk was, to me, will go down in history, one of the great workers of all time.
Harley made history again up in Canada, meeting Terry on a Sunday afternoon up there for the world title. So not only were there two brothers that were world heavyweight champions, WWF world champions, but also got defeated by the same man. And Harley took the belt and had a great run.
He was wrestler, fighter, talker. He could make people love him, make people hate him, but you believed in him. When he pointed that finger at the camera and he looked and you saw them big rings and that big fist, you knew this man is no joke.
Harley commanded a lot of respect and got it.
Harley Race is one badass guy.
And when I get back, I'm gonna hurt you. I'm gonna hurt you somehow. If I gotta do it that way, fine. You have insulted the world heavyweight champion.
Anybody who stepped in the ring with Harley Race and didn't say he was one of the toughest men alive would be lying. Harley was amazing. Just methodical, and he wasn't colorful, but again, for, you know, the late 70s and early 80s when he had the title, he was the champion. He was the face of the title, and I think he fit the time very well, but also, you know, wrestled tremendously.
Harley Race had a real style. He was, when you watch him in his prime in the ring, when his weight was down, and he was very graceful in his way, but you know, was a tough guy wrestling. I mean, came across, talked that way, and was serious about his profession.
Bill, I devote a lot of my life to what I do. And I say a lot, I'm saying darn near 95%. I stay in condition above and beyond anything else.
Harley Race was tough as nails. You knew when you saw a match with Harley Race in it, you knew you were getting a great professional wrestling bout. He held the title on 8 different occasions, and That in alone signifies what the NWA felt about him, especially when it came to defending the title, meeting all comers, and being a reputable champion.
8 title runs, the competition that he went up against, he was a great champion.
Harley Race is the greatest wrestler on God's green earth. He said it every week on television.
Let me tell you something. It's gonna come down to you, me.
He was the greatest that I ever saw, in person as a kid. There was something to him, just that when he walked to the ring and he'd take the robe and push it back and there was that 10 pounds of gold. Harley Race was the man.
He's like your perfect kind of NWA champion where, he's got those multiple styles that he can work. He can go that 60 minutes with Briscoe or Dory Funk and trade arm bars and headlocks with him, or he can go out there and brawl with anybody.
He was an effective world champion.
Harley was kind of at the end of that era, and certainly brought a lot of prestige to the belt when he had it, certainly.
And this right here is symbolic of being in the greatest shape of any human being on the face of the earth. It says right on top, World's Heavyweight Champion, and which means that I can beat any man in the world.
And Harley is that much integrity, he would never do anything to hurt you. I mean, Harley will pride himself the rest of his life on being NWA champion, as we all do.
If the only thing you've ever done is wrestle, and you finally hit that epitome of what you set out to do, there is no better feeling. It was, the greatest feelings you could ever have, being, doing what you're doing.
Harley had it almost for a full decade, other than losing it for short periods of time there. He was the man, and he drew everywhere. He drew in Tokyo, Japan. He drew in Memphis, Tennessee. He drew in Kansas City. He drew in Charlotte. He drew everywhere he went. Atlanta, Georgia, wherever Harley Race was at, it was a sold-out house.
And Harley Race is kind of the beginning of turning the title over a few times.
He lost it for just a couple days down in Georgia to Tommy Rich.
And I know people looking back, who are fans, look back at, okay, Tommy Rich in Georgia, what's the big deal about him?
Tommy was the first true national superstar at WTBS out of Atlanta. When that Channel 17 went on cable and satellite around the world, I don't think to this day Tommy ever realizes how over he was in the late 70s and early 80s on WTBS.
There probably wasn't a bigger star when Georgia Championship Wrestling was at its heyday on TBS there than Tommy Rich.
He wasn't the greatest wrestler in the world, but he could show some fire in the ring. Wildfire was his nickname, and he could talk in a way that particularly rural people, country people could really get behind, and he became a big star.
Talk about an anomaly. There's all kinds of stories of how that happened and all.
It was a short run. I don't know the circumstances why they gave him the belt. He was extremely over in Georgia.
Jim Barnett, who was booking the world champion at that time, got Harley Race to go along with losing the title to Tommy Rich and then getting it back to give Tommy Rich that boost. And he was a big star at that time. Everybody knew, he was all over the magazines at a time when the wrestling magazines meant something.
Barnett was booking the champion at the time. He was fighting the fight there between Ann Gunkel and himself. Ole was not into Atlanta then. Fred Ward and a couple other people were in Atlanta with him, and he wanted to assure himself that he'd win the fight. So they asked me if I would put Rich over, and I said, well, if you think I'm going to do this for any extended period of time, you got another thing coming.
All right.
And I dropped it to him in Augusta, Georgia, and won it back in Gainesville. Dropped it on Monday, won it back on Friday, so I guess what, 6 days.
I just defended for the 7 days, and then we'll come back to Gainesville, Georgia. I'd been on the road. We'll come back to Gainesville, and Harley beat me back in Gainesville for the title.
Rich's winning the title was very important to the business and showing fans that a title could happen, a title change could happen anywhere. And again, it was a big boost to the promotion in Georgia.
That was a lot of pressure there.
Was it?
That was
You know, I mean, because it's a lot of responsibility, and I might not have been ready for it, but like I said, I've been there and I've done it, and you know, Harley Race, that was another one of the great ones, you know, who's, I mean, one of the top in the wrestling business, and I had the opportunity to wrestle them all, and it's been one of the greatest educations, I mean, that you could ever have.
Yeah.
Had a lot of fun doing it, too.
Yeah.
You know, title reign's a title reign.
He couldn't have handled being a long-term champion, Tommy Rich. He didn't have the grappling, shooter, hooker skills that the other guys who held the belt had. As an in-ring performer, Tommy Rich was as good as anybody. He just wasn't a real wrestler.
I don't believe Tommy would, because Tommy, he was a good-looking guy. People loved him, country boy. Thank you, Mr. Soley. You know, he was that all down-home, white meat country baby face that everybody loved. And how you going to take that kind of guy and take him to Charlotte, and he's going to have to be the guy that everybody wants to see get beat? Well, it ain't going to happen. You're going to bring him home to Tennessee and people boo him? It ain't going to happen.
He carried the belt, so he should be recognized, but he's not going to go toward the top of the list of great champions, in my opinion.
I think Tommy was a guy with incredible popularity, good fire. He was a good performer. You know, I think he worked real hard in the ring. I wrestled Tommy many hour brothers. I can't say anything but good things about Tommy Rich, you know. I think he had some personal stuff going on, but God, who am I to talk about personal issues? So, I mean, I think he held himself back a little bit, but he clearly was a big star, and he was over, and the crowd loved him, the girls loved him. He was easy to work with, a very, very good worker.
He's on the list, you know. He's in the record books as that, but hard to measure a champion with such a short reign as that. But again, you can't take it away from him. He was heavyweight champion.
A lot of people say, you know, I mean, call it a 7-day wonder, but the thing about it is, 1981, I was 19, and I had the opportunity. I mean, there's not many people that can say that they wore the NWA heavyweight title, whether it's one day or, you know, a year. It don't matter. It was one of the biggest accomplishments in my life that I'd ever done. You know, and I love to hold the belt longer, but like I said, I was there, I did it, and you know, people say what they want, but they ain't never been there.
Lost it to Dusty Rhodes.
Dusty Rhodes was a phenomenon out of Florida, where that talking and then just kind of the stylized, the elbow, the trash talking, the prancing in the ring, he could entertain fans in a way that, and he had promised so often to win the world title, and they booked it so much, and there were people that didn't want him to win the world championship because he didn't have that. It was important to those, particularly those old-time promoters, the older promoters, that there was some wrestling credibility there, and that wasn't Dusty Rhodes' act. And so, but he was a big draw, and he was money, and so it was decided to give him a brief time as the world champion, so he could say, I won the title, and then you could rip it off from him.
Dusty was a transitional champion. He was never, I don't think, meant to hold the title long.
Dusty didn't need the title to be the superstar that he was, simply because he was the most charismatic individual of that era. He was a common man. He had connections to the common people. That's what those people related to. He was the one that you rooted for, and that was the draw.
They put it on Dusty because the charisma part.
Dusty was the people's champion. Dusty had it 3 different times, but he never needed to keep it long because it kind of tarnished. His whole thing was chasing that belt. But once he got it, okay, yeah, he's got it. Now what? So he had to lose it so he could chase it again. You know, he didn't need a belt. Dusty was so charismatic, so over, such a star. And it didn't matter if it was professional wrestling or whatever Dusty Rhodes was going to be in. He was going to be famous. He was going to be the star. But wrestling was his chosen profession, and he made it to the fullest. He didn't have to have a belt to say, there's the American dream. He was the people's champion.
He was good to be champion, but he was even better trying to be champion.
Dusty, you know, all of his reigns were very short, and you know, more of a transitional kind of champion. Would have been interesting to see if he would have kept it for a longer period of time. You know, how the run would have been, because he certainly was popular.
Dusty's colorful. I find Dusty very entertaining. A lot of people don't like Dusty. His stick gets old a little bit, but you know, he wasn't someone the NWA